Welcome to the Adventurers Club, celebrating its 100th birthday. My name is Alan Feldstein. I'm member 1094. And like all great adventurers, you have to deal with things that come your way that you may not have planned. And our speaker that was scheduled for this evening got ill. And so our esteemed member, Andrew McGregor, has wonderfully decided to fill in and tell us an incredible story about explosives, rats, and Africa. And if you can figure out how those three all fit together, we're going to let Andrew tell you. But first, I guess the primary question is, how did you first get to Africa?
Yeah, thank you very much, and thank you all for coming tonight. Basically, I first went to Africa after I visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp, and I was kind of just making my way as a young photojournalist at the time. So in that concentration camp, there are two photos that were taken by the inmates themselves, and I got really obsessed with this notion of the Holocaust being erased. And then so I was in graduate school for journalism at the time, and I had this idea of what other atrocities have been erased. And the example that was forefront in my mind was the Rwandan genocide, where for 6 weeks, very little information was known except for, perhaps intelligence services and things like that. So yeah, I had this idea of using media and journalism education to help people get out of poverty and get jobs, because with media you can directly connect people to job opportunities without accreditation and things that generally could keep someone down, right, or prevent them from entering.
I want to back up 1 second, though. So you went to Rwanda. Was the Genocide Museum open yet at the time that you were there? Because there's a beautiful is a terrible term, but probably one of the greatest exhibits about genocide is in Rwanda, and they do a great job because nobody goes out unscathed. And I was wondering if you
I don't think that was there at this time. I visited many genocide sites and piles of bones and things like that.
Okay.
But yeah, so basically with a couple of buddies, we flew into Kigali and started to teach journalism. And so these photos were taken by our students. So in terms of kind of like media and representation and photojournalism, you can see there's kind of like a joyous intimacy from a peer taking a picture of another peer, as opposed to some of my photojournalism work that you'll see later. But yeah, so it was very uncertain if things would work out and if the program would be accepted, because it's a different culture and all that. But we had a lot of great initial success, and many of our students got jobs. And if they weren't doing proper journalism in that sense, they were able to work for the United Nations doing PR and things like that. So kind of like to everyone's joyous surprise, like the methodology started to work. And I'm glossing over a lot of like the struggles. Like when we flew in there was no like mid-range hotel, right? It was all like...
Yeah, that's what I want to see. Let's not gloss over some of those, because they make for great stories.
Like, so there was like one luxury hotel where like the well-funded United Nations people would stay, but when we first got there, we ended up in a brothel, basically, in kind of the outskirts of Kigali, and we didn't have like a shower or anything. It was just like a electrified rod in a bucket, and and everyone was cool. They just like did the brothel things in the front, but there was just like no way to... There wasn't like even an industry. There was no Airbnb. It was nothing like that. So literally, we like found our way in this new society, teaching journalism, like coming from that, and then eventually, like, we were able to work with some of our students to like rent a house, and then that has a whole deliberative process, because you want to get your living situation near the generals because they have better utility, and like the power doesn't go out in the neighborhoods with the generals. I'll put it that way, right? So yeah, so we started teaching in Rwanda. I'm going to focus on a few narratives to get us along with. It's a vast undertaking to kind of go to a civilization like this.
How long were you in Rwanda for?
The organization was eventually forced out, but we were there for, I think, 5 years in total. 4 years, 3 to 4 years, yeah.
So you lived in Kigali for 3 to 4 years?
I wasn't personally there all the time, because I was sometimes going back and forth, but I was there for 6 to 9 months. I've lived in Kigali, yeah. The organization, the methodology of teaching journalism kind of spread, if you will. So other aspiring and young journalists heard about our methodology, and so we ended up in slums in Kenya and things like that, and doing a substantial remote program in Mogadishu, it's a whole other tale. But yeah, back to Kigali. So we're in Kigali, we're teaching photojournalism, and we're like posting these stories and these photos to the organization's website. It's called the Tiziano Project, after Tiziano Terzani, who was my kind of journalism hero, and I was very moved by his books. And then our students they kind of had the idea that we should go to Congo. So Rwanda borders what are called the Kivus, North and South Kivu in Congo, which is one of the most violent, kind of savage places in terms of human brutality that there is. So yeah, so we kind of heeded the call of journalism that was reflected back from our students of, you should be there. And we also started to teach people in the refugee camp. So great and good, Phoebe, can we go to the refugee camp part? And these will be my photos now, so you can kind of see the difference. Oh, excuse me, this was kind of my big break as a photojournalist. That's Mia Farrow, who came to Rwanda and wept at a genocide site. And then with that image, I kind of was able to get to the higher levels of photojournalism. That was in many major American newspapers. And yeah, there's an intensity to being in Rwanda because there's so many mass grave sites and things like that.
And still to this day, I mean, I find Rwanda is one of my favorite countries in Africa. And one of the things that I'm amazed is how far this country has come. And a lot of Rwandans will tell you, because of the genocide, and that we will never let this happen again. And so we're going to show the world that it won't happen again. So yeah, it's pretty entrepreneurial and incredible.
Yeah, so that was kind of my first break. And then so after that, I went into Congo to kind of continue the work. And yeah, so I focused a lot on refugees, and there's a city called Goma in eastern Congo. And so after the 94 genocide, there was a volcanic eruption that buried a lot of the city in volcanic rock. So to this day, there's buses that are sticking out of lava. And so this refugee camp is on volcanic rock. So as horrible as it is to be a refugee, you're also with this jagged, terrible substrate that cuts you. And this was kind of this will get darker and darker, but a beginning of kind of a hellscape. But I was really trying to show what was going on to the broader world and that kind of ideal of photojournalism. And kids smiling with a Barney doll, right? You just see these peculiar artifacts of Western culture that, you have no idea how or why they would have arrived in this place in this time. Yeah, and then but as I'm going through this, the idea and reality of children who are insane kind of comes up, and this is kind of the beginning of it. But in this particular camp, for example, there were these 2 8-year-olds, and they were kind of standing about as far from me as you are right now, and some disruption or quarrel emerged, and then one child immediately picked up a rock to smash the face of the other child, just like that. But there was something about my presence that stopped him. But it was, it was just that moment of Jesus, what's going on here? That things are about to happen.
Different world, different reactions.
Precisely.
And the impact of the genocide and the impact of violence and stuff like that, that's probably hard to capture in a photograph, but that sounds like that was sort of one of your goals while you were over there, to sort of really dig down and portray honestly what was going on.
Yeah, it wasn't, at this time, this was more the refugees, because I, just being there when you want to tell the world what's going on, and you assume the world will stop it, right? That it's not a status quo thing, which it turns out it is, and there's a whole system in place to maintain, the status quo, no matter how horrifying it is. Once the bureaucracy enables it, it continues. But then, there are also these incredible moments, this, because the people they're living like this, but they kind of have proper clothing and just, maintain human dignity in the face of just things that would annihilate most, if not all, people. So I would, but again, I didn't really know what I was getting to either, so I didn't really have this kind of agenda. I was just showing what was going on, and I was trying to get it all out on the wire services, because my power as a photojournalist at that time is that the editors of the East African bureaus were receiving my photos, and they were trying to push out the story with that kind of hope and their capacity to
But seeing this as someone who came from the United States who didn't witness this growing up and stuff, how do you think it impacted you and impacted the trajectory of your life going forward?
Oh, that's coming. Yeah. So I am currently, this is quite close to Goma, and then kind of a few photos forward, I will end up. Yeah, she was kind of like that last photo. She was kind of like a PR rep. Like there was a tribal chief who ran the refugee camp, and then he was very well fed, and then but it was almost similar to like a Los Angeles like red carpet event. There's this very like pretty woman in a dress who comes out and like showed me the stories that they wanted. So there was a sense of, I guess, media literacy, even in kind of like a pre-YouTube Rwandan refugee camp, which was peculiar. Just that kind of commodity of media from photos they like would never see or wouldn't even have access to and things like that. And then of course like the cute noble kids who were suffering like kids shouldn't. But yeah, so this is one camp over the volcanic stone, and then we'll kind of move a bit further out of Goma towards a city called Masisi. Oh, right, so this is a maternity ward, and I think people often don't think of like a refugee camp having a maternity ward at all, but yeah, life goes on in this kind of sustained conflict. I think there's a deeply embedded notion in most Western societies that refugee camps are camps, they're temporary, but that's not the case at all. And so there's, yeah, women giving birth and kind of like your normal life. Like this photo in particular, I find quite touching. That was just after she gave birth. And then just kind of the will. Oh, and albinos. I just going to briefly touch on that. So there's two stories I'll share. So in Uganda, there's this kind of folk myth of albinos being used in like witchcraft and for potions and such. So they're sometimes hunted. There's a whole kind of NGO system that tries to protect them. And then there's one terrible story from Kigali. There was this albino he lived on the streets, and he's a Tutsi. And so just to revive the history, the Hutus and the Tutsis, that was what the genocide was about, if you're not familiar with it out there in the internet lands. But he was an albino Tutsi, and then the Hutus spared his life because he was albino, almost as like a joke, like we'll leave that one alive, and that kind of sadistic humor and mindset. And then after the genocide, when the Rwandan Patriotic Front moved the Hutus and the genocidaires into Congo, he was this like reviled creature because he had lived. And so he just like it kind of existed in this awful netherworld of humanity, despised by everyone, but spared because of his albino thing. So yeah, I just want to kind of touch on that if people weren't aware of that kind of nuance of Central African cultures. So the further we get from Goma, like the more violent things become, and you can kind of see the hatred that's now brewing in people. And it was just kind of peculiar that there was like a zeitgeist of violence. Even though like it was a similar refugee camp, it was just this sense in the air that things were growing worse and worse. And Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness is really apt, and I believe he was actually in Congo and based it on, Colonel Kurtz was based on a Belgian guy who I think died back in Belgium. They have his butterfly collection in a museum there to this day. But yeah, so I'm going from refugee camp to refugee camp, just trying to like show the world what's going on. There's some more examples of that. And then there's a peculiarity with photojournalism, because you need to make a beautiful photo, and like what do you leave in, what do you leave out? And yeah, like something like this, like these moments became more and more intense. And then I'm there as this Caucasian, so I represent like a lot of things to a lot of people. And there's an assumption that I can like solve the problem, which you're there as a photojournalist to try and do that. But there's this like disconnect.
But you're
between
an observer more than being involved in
correct,
stuff. And
you have to be an observer, or you'll get killed, or you'll kill other people, because then you're like picking up a gun and then like, oh no, I'm a so there's it's a peculiar kind of like devotion to one's duty that you have to maintain, or else it just kind of destroys the equilibrium.
And where was your work shown? Where were some of the publications?
I was through the wire services, so it was like Reuters, the Associated Press, Agence France Press, was there any other? Oh, and European Press Agency. So yeah, they were kind of taking taking these as I could send them out. Yeah, so things are getting more and more intense as we kind of leave Goma towards Masisi. And yeah, you can kind of see here like the nicely dressed refugees from earlier, which is just like 10 kilometers away, are now not, right? Like human degradation is increasing in like true poverty and like lack of hygiene, and no one's smiling anymore. Yeah, so we're making our way, but you know, there's always these beautiful moments. And we're out of the volcanic thing. This is what people eat. So they're like cooking their own food, and the UNHCR, the United Nations Refugee Group, will give them rice and beans. And then that's actually its old weird economy, because a lot of the source is like subsidized from US farms for food that won't be consumed in this country. So it's like a weird kind of government subsidization thing to feed refugees with kind of like food that we wouldn't eat here. It still has nutritive value, but it's a peculiar like government write-off subsidy thing of like the sourcing of this food at that time. I don't know if they've
and
shifted
I'm
the
curious,
policy since
speaking
then.
of economy, you have these camps, and as you correctly point out, they become ingrained. They're not temporary. And so there must be an economy that has to sort of exist within these camps. And what is that sort of
Yeah, if we go forward a little bit, you can see like there's a bicycle repair shop. So these kind of, that's back of the maternity ward. Yeah, like basically like small businesses. There was like a bootlegger I encountered once, just like people getting drunk on, like, it's called the banana beer, I think.
Yeah.
It's just like rot gut, doesn't even come close to it. But yeah, so that guy was repairing bicycle, and I think it's like a lot of barter things like, now I believe it's like phone cards and things like that. Yeah, but you make an economy from what's available. That could be like a sheet of paper, because you know there's scarcity of everything. So like a human economy naturally emerges in that environment, and it's kind of a fascinating realm to be in.
So you're in the Congo, and
Yeah.
you're moving to all these refugee camps.
Yeah.
And then what happens next?
We will I will embed with the United Nations, who are set to deliver food to a town called Masisi, where the people hadn't been fed for, I think, 6 weeks.
And what was that experience like?
That's coming up. So but yeah, basically, just to give like a bit of context of war in that part of the world, there's not like a flag that's put on top of a hill and that person claims the valley and then controls the tariffs. It's it's mineral rich, right? And because it's so mineral rich, it's attracted like the creepiest and the worst of humanity. Like it even has uranium, right? So that's, a previous Congolese president was named Mobutu, and was this like savage ruler, but he kept uranium away from the Soviets. So America, and like the creepiest of the CIA of America, was supportive of him. And yeah, so I guess like this story I don't like, but it's illustrative. So there was there's a mineral called coltan, which is used in almost every electronic device. And so a new PlayStation was coming out, and that increased the price of coltan. And so the fighting like intensified in Congo based on this obscure commodities market. And in my kind of journalism ahead, I'm like, oh, real people are dying so that
You can have a
American
Sony playing
teenagers
station.
can kill fake people. Isn't life grand? Yeah, all right, so here we are. So I've embedded with the United Nations now, and there's a lot of refugees are fleeing the active fighting right now. And so yeah, you can see we're going up the hill, and they're carrying literally everything with them, and kind of like streaming past these UN troops. And the UN troops were Indian, and there was even like the caste system that the grunts, like those guys would only spoke Hindi, and then the officers all spoke English. So it was like this reflection of Indian society. They're part of a contingent called Manuk, and at the time, I think this is still true, it was the largest UN deployment in the world with about 30 or 35,000 UN soldiers, and that was created after the Rwandan genocide, and has remained as this kind of peacekeeping presence ever since. But yeah, so there I am with the fellas. Yeah, and we're going up the hill. The refugees are streaming out, and we're getting more and more remote. And then kind of on the hills, you can't really see it here, but you can see the militia up there. And then also, Rwanda has never left Congo. So this gets like in kind of the dark things. So a lot of them were these Tutsi militias as well, in addition to the Congolese. So you have this kind of Rwandan-backed mineral extraction that then goes to kind of dealers in Israel and Jordan and such through these like late night planes. But from the West, like the kind of hardliners at the State Department want stability. So they will kind of allow the kind of the atrocities we're going to learn about here. So finally we get to Masisi. This is the food delivery. I think the UN wanted some pleasant PR, if you will. But yeah, it was a struggle to get there. And then everyone, and that storehouse was completely empty. But yeah, here's everyone just loading up the food for the refugees in this town called Masisi. And it was a pretty kind of heroic effort to bring everyone, yeah, their food. But like the fighting had already intensified. So that kind of like zeitgeist of violence was really getting palpable here, and we'll see some photos that are evidence of that. And then so if we stay on that photo, so I went to a Doctors Without Borders field clinic up there, and Doctors Without Borders is this really fascinating and I think noble French government-backed organization that will set up clinics in war zones, and they have this fascinating like nonpartisan policy that like even in the fiercest, strangest, most deranged conflicts in Africa,
all they're there is to take care of people.
Yeah, and everyone respects that. So I can't. That guy lost I think he got his leg shot off. It wasn't a machete. But I was going through kind of like taking photos of these people. And then I actually was credited with discovering a new militia. There was another group called the Mai who've been fighting in that part of Congo even since the Belgians, and then they had a spin-off group called Perico, and I discovered it in that kind of Western sense of like, you named a new militia.
Congratulations.
Right. So yeah, I'm going.
How come you didn't call it the McGregor militia?
It wasn't mine to name. They had named it. You know, it was unknown to science.
I'm curious, in all these fantastic photos that you've done of people and stuff, how receptive were they to you to taking their photos? My
personal ethic with that is to always get consent. If we can go, like, and it can be nonverbal, so I would just like tilt the camera like a pot of tea forward, and then if the person like acquiesced, or I don't know if that's right, but like would accept it, then I would, yeah, like this one, like, and they wanted me there, like they wanted
people that they wanted to know
the
their
world
stories
to know, yeah. So it was hard, like everyone was suffering so much, and all these people with gunshots, but they still wanted the story told. And I still find that incredible to this day, that like, what is that within the human condition that like you need to share this, and you need to tell others what's going on. It's you're in like the most kind of heinous and violent environment, but then people have a faith that someone cares, right? And so that's that kind of a sense of paradox really strikes me. So this guy, that's the Perico guy. He'd been shot through the chest, and that photo got to Reuters. And again, so I'm able to like get the photos out, but it's just it was very difficult to be in that situation.
And you didn't have students with you at this time?
No. Basically, how journalism training works, looking back on it, the more stable an environment, you can do like a group class of like 16 to 20. But for any kind of war zone stuff, it has to be individual mentorship. Like our remote program in Mogadishu, I would work directly with Somalis who had made that choice. And the Somalis it was a kind of, I don't know, it's beyond courage as we know it. They just determined to die as journalists, and were calm about it. Like there was one time my student was covering, it was in Mogadishu. I'll do a little side tangent to speak of this point. It was the first medical class to have graduated in years after Al-Shabaab took it over. And I don't know if we have time to go into Al-Shabaab, but Al-Shabaab ran the country, and they were effective, and they had brought it from kind of chaos, but they were Islamic and very Islamic extremist, and so America backed Ethiopia, and then it got more and more vicious. Anyway, so like the medical students were kind of a Western affront to them, so they blew up the graduating class. And I think they killed all the students, But then one of my students was there, and as he was walking away, the bomb went off, and it killed his dear friend. But I'm like on G-chat with him minutes after that, and he's like, "Oh, hello, I have a story for you, sir." I'm like,
wow.
And it was just that. It's strange. Like,
yeah,
how are you that calm and brave?
Yeah.
And it's even beyond like the Western like stoicism or like procedures or thing. It was just like, that's what happens to us.
Is it a numbness or
no? It's
just,
not.
That's the way of. That's the way
like
of life
I decided
here.
to be a journalist, and this is what happens to journalists, and we honor you.
Did you have any close calls in any of these?
Oh yeah, that's coming up. So yeah, so
I'm good at predicting what's coming up.
Aren't you? Yes, you should be in the pictures. All right, so this is this kid who's just insane, and I wanted to illustrate that this idea of like an 8-year-old who's mad is very foreign, and like we don't even have it here, but it is part of the human condition, and this is right before things get bad. So this is like a day before the proverbial hell breaks loose, and there would be an atrocity. I don't want to talk too much about that. It's kind of difficult for me, but yeah, this was just like this. We're playing with machete thing happened, and then there would be a massacre around children with machetes soon after this. But yeah, it's like in front of the UN vehicle. So it was this buildup of the violence, and then I think. So here's this UN helicopter. This was like the weird Kafkaesque part of this. So this is only about like 70 kilometers, I think, from the border with Rwanda. And the UN was flying in one of these, I think it's a Chinook helicopter, every day. And like there'd be like a Ugandan general in like a big bulletproof vest who would like observe and then fly out. And like people had started to drop mortars into the city. And people are evacuating. So that's one of the evacuation shots. But I wasn't like on the official UN manifest. So I'm like, it was every day I would go like, can I get on the fucking helicopter? And they're like, no. And I had a colleague with me as well. So we were gonna, she's a radio journalist, or she was at the time for Voice of America. And then, but it was just bizarre because like I don't care, I'll sleep on the floor. Like we don't have enough seats. It's like, I need to get out of here. So that went on, and then, I think this.
How long did it go on for?
This next clip is coming up, and then there's an audio clip that survived of when the carnage really started, and that's when I was almost killed. I don't want to go too much on that, but yeah, if we can play that clip, Phoebe, the audio clip. I do if you're a Swahili speaker, I make a joke.
Is it money?
Yeah.
Part of it got cut off, but I say Hakuna Matata or no, because we've been learning Swahili. But like that was kind of the start of it. We're just like the madness of like laughter while there's like bullets going over our head, and we're just running for our lives. And so basically, it was just days of me and my colleague like fleeing and just rape and carnage and death. Eventually, a ceasefire was declared, and I was able to. Yeah, so these are the people who saved my life. I don't know their names, and they're like just saved me, right? Like, it's that kind of like other world of bravery.
Were you a target at all? Do you think, or just?
Yeah, but it wasn't.
Were you just one?
It was just chaos. So it's like, let's kill the thing. I guess. Yeah, I was, but it wasn't like a situational, or there was no strategy behind it. It was just everything was fucked, and it was the violent time kind of thing.
And here's a target.
So those, like one of those guys like took a 2 machetes in each hand and like warded off a mob that was trying to kill me. Yeah, so I don't know, like I owe those men my life, and I don't know their names. They were just like they just said, no, you're not gonna die today. So yeah, I don't know.
Wow.
It's another world of kind of bravery and such, right?
Yeah.
All right, so moving right along.
That's why we call this the Adventurers Club.
Indeed. So this is I think this is kind of telling. It's a PSA advising not to rape. And so I finally got out of Misisi. This is near the border. I was able to cross back into Rwanda and file stories. There's a whole lot of other stuff that went on, and but yeah, I just thought that like permanent PSA that had been, I think, shot up saying "Don't rape," just kind of sums up a lot of that carnage. But yeah, there's a lot more. I just don't want to talk about all the war stuff right now. But anyway, so
because I want to get to the cute furry.
Yeah, we're getting to the cute furry thing. So I get back to Los Angeles, and I'm what our World War II forefathers would call shell-shocked. And that for me was just, I couldn't feel anything. And so that's also another story. But I also like had seen what I had seen, and I like people had to know, and I had to stop it somehow. And so I was just doing everything I could to, I think I call it raising awareness and such. But I had this idea of like making a movie that would kind of inspire people to work on landmines. And so I wrote and directed a film. This took several years, but the genesis was right after Congo. And so, yeah, here's a still from the movie, and then we're just gonna show like an animated sequence comes later. But yeah, so it's a love story between a rat and a robot who guide these women who are stranded in a minefield out of it.
Is there a clip?
There's a clip. There's a few more stills of what the women look like, and yeah, if you want to see the full version, I can send you a link. But yeah, it's basically the plot and the setup is that they run out of water in a landmine field and go insane, and then a plucky rat robot team comes. And the reason I chose a rat is there is an organization that trains rats to discover landmines, and we can see the crucial clip from the film where the rat and the robot have a bond.
Do we have the clip coming up?
I think so.
Here we go. That's great. Brilliant.
Thank you. Yeah, so I had that film, and then because it's me, I decided to like try and make the robot for my movie real. And there are collaborators along this, but this was kind of the latest and greatest version of that. But it turns out I had stumbled into a very difficult problem in robotics, which is like theory of mind. And so in this case, this is a very nice rat who will like eat from your hands. It's very well trained. And then so this had like a food dispenser on it. So I was thinking like the robot could watch the rat find landmines and then give it food. But then it turns out when this rat met this robot, it just attacked it and like savagely ripped the food out. And I was like, oh dear, it's a whole other kind of form factor. The rat doesn't need to be polite to the robot. The rat can, mug the robot. And so once the rat started attacking the robot, my dream was kind of waning, but at the same time it was getting like a lot of media attention. Like I was almost on a TV show called America's Greatest Makers with this robot idea, and that like, so I knew there was something there, like how do you like have benevolent technology help people not get blown up. So yeah, if we can move to the next slide, or yeah. So I started to build it, and I was getting like some TV show stuff. Yeah, a lot of it was just like a cool, fun idea of like, can a robot and a rat communicate with each other? And then but it was this hard problem that like was beyond even a PhD level computer vision of like the robot watching the rat, the robot being able to see everything the rat was doing. But then I went to a lecture by this guy named Ian Ingram, I think whose slide is coming up here, and he's a roboticist who makes robots they communicate with animals in nature, and they're like as performance art. So I started to work with him. I kind of went up to him like Kung Fu style, like, I got this thing, can I like, be your understudy or whatever? And so for a summer we worked together, and I helped him build a robotic squirrel. Is that image up there? So and his robotic squirrel idea, it has a squirrel tail. And so if you've ever seen like a squirrel that's upset, its tail flicks. And that like signifies other squirrels that head to the trees. So he has this real brilliance for like that kind of thing of like, what's the signifier in nature? And then there's a kind of a Baltic German philosopher named Jakob von Uexküll, who had this idea of the Umwelt, and that is basically that all organisms have like a sensory sphere. So if you imagine a meadow, like a human and a deer like see each other because there's like a predator-prey or a threat at least relationship, but then like bees and flowers can communicate differently. Like certain flowers, like bees can see colors on flowers that human eyes can't perceive, and so the flower and the bee have a relationship. And then the classic example from this kind of a biologist philosopher is like a tick. Like how do ticks find themselves onto you? They can't hunt, they don't move. Yeah, here we are. So, but like you've probably had a tick on you, most people have, and they just sit there and they have these like few chemical cues. So one is, I think, motion, and then they drop, and then it's heat. All mammalian flesh is within a certain temperature range, and then they climb until they find a non-hairy spot, and then they eat, reproduce, and the system goes on. But it's basically like 3 simple triggers that enable ticks to flourish, even though we go to great pains not to have them, but there they are. So all this thinking with the rat and robot, it led to making, here's a little demo puppet rat, a wearable for the rat. Because rats can communicate to a human through motion, but humans are watching the rat when it finds a landmine. So I thought, like, what if we could have, and my kind of mentor in this, like, what if we could make a kind of like a Fitbit for the giant rats that find landmines? And so basically when the rat scratches and indicates it's found a landmine, you can register that body motion and then communicate to a human that the landmine has been found.
So let me make sure I understand this.
Yeah.
So the rat is out in a minefield.
Yep.
How do you train the rat to know that's a mine?
Yeah, so the organization that trains them is called APOPO, and like through the kind of publicity, I became friends with the organization before I just heard of them. Cool, here we are. So this was like the great return to Africa, not as a civil rights-minded journalist, but as a scientist, and that was like a completely different Africa,
But this is in Tanzania,
That's
correct?
in Tanzania. So yeah, basically it takes 9 months to train a giant African pouch rat, and they do it through behavioral reinforcement, similar to how you would a dog. So the rats are born, and then they put TNT near them, and then do a clicky sound, like, to reinforce it. And then after the rat hears the click, they give it some banana. So the rat learns to associate yummy deliciousness with finding a landmine.
So the rat finds the landmine.
Yep.
And I'm assuming it doesn't weigh enough to trigger the
Correct.
landmine.
Yeah, these are giant rats, but they're only 2 to 3 pounds. It takes about, I think, 8 kilograms to set off most anti-personnel mines.
And so it scratches as its signal
Yep.
that there's a landmine there.
Yep.
And then how does it communicate to the human? By observation?
Yeah, so the human's watching it the whole time.
Okay.
And then watches for the scratch.
And then what does the back, for lack of a better term, back pan do?
So that is to help the human not have to stare at rat legs all day.
Okay.
So basically, like a Fitbit can tell if you're walking or jogging, based on
So
accelerometer
this sends
data.
a message to the humans that the rat is doing its
Doing
scratching.
its thing. Yep.
Got it.
And that's the basis of the technology.
Brilliant.
I'll talk about how it advances a little bit. What clip are we on now? But yeah, so that got me back to Africa in a different
How was it
context.
going back to Africa in a different context?
It was hard because I returned several times after that thing in Congo, right? And the organization was very successful, and like a lot of our students had great jobs, and but it was deeply destructive personally. So yeah, like going back and it was just like all the death and sacrifice and such was there. But then, yeah, going back to Tanzania, it was all the memories were there, and I don't know if it was like processing or what, but to be there as this kind of naturalist was different. It was just so not violent.
Do you think you would have diagnosed yourself as someone with PTSD from your Congo experience?
Yeah, I quibble with that definition, but like just the idea of it's a disorder.
And I find it very interesting because, I'm very passionate about Africa, and I have a company that does safaris in Africa where everything is wonderful and beautiful and wildlife and stuff. So it's a completely opposite experience of what you went through.
Yeah.
And though I've dealt with tragedies and deaths and stuff like that, I find it fascinating that that's your first experience, and which is so different from what most people experience on their first trip to Africa.
So basically that was the idea for the tech, and then it's kind of moved along now with this idea of like a wearable for the rats has advanced a lot, and so there'll be a little video clip coming up, but the rats, they're deployed in Cambodia primarily right now. There's about a 100-person team doing demining work in Cambodia with the rats. And then recently we've started to extend into search and rescue applications so the rats can go into collapsed buildings.
So much like a dog, but just you're
they
using
can go into
rats
spaces a
so the
dog
dogs
could not.
can't,
Yeah, but that kind of idea. And then we can see a little video clip about the technology I'm working on for that capacity.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. And I guess with technology, with everything being able to get smaller and smaller, cameras and things like that, it must make it easier to outfit the rats, or no?
Yeah, this is actually a pretty interesting thing because in terms of a collapsed building, it's very hard to know location data, what's called localization, because you can't broadcast any signals out. But there's really, with the refinement of AI and machine learning algorithms that can be embedded onto a little backpack like that, there's a lot of research coming out from the mobile phone thing with just a video camera and accelerometer data. You can actually localize within a collapsed structure. And that's actually like the fascinating thing at the forefront of everything. Like it's not a solved problem at all. So it's this like really cool, odd, obscure engineering challenge. But yeah, how do you localize a rat within a collapsed structure looking for human survivors without being able to broadcast the signal out? And kind of the pathway we're exploring for that is to mix the video footage is valuable in its own right, but then you can actually create a new kind of localization scenario by mixing embedded AI on a microprocessor with the camera footage.
And in terms of smell and intelligence, where do the rats compare to dogs? Do they have a better sense of smell? Are they more intelligent, or?
They're bright, and I think I've heard from researchers at APOPO that it's a better sense of smell, but I don't know if they're rat biased, right? But both rats and dogs have like vastly more that's like sensitivity than what's required for this task. But yeah, you can think of them as little dogs, little German shepherds, who will go find the humans now.
And they're mostly being deployed in Cambodia now?
For the what's called mine action, or landmine removal, the biggest program is in Cambodia. I think it has like a $2 million a year budget, and about 100 people are working on that. The search and rescue stuff is quite new. We're about to kind of test with a Turkish search and rescue organization. And actually, I was in a disaster expo. There is such a thing today, to see if we could like get these working with kind of like that last mile thing with people who are already using dogs to do search and rescue. And that has its own kind of interesting American history, that after the Oklahoma City bombing, people were just like looking for survivors with their dogs, and it was all very happenstance. And now there's like certain organizations that train people to do search and rescue operations with dogs on like a kind of volunteer firefighter kind of capacity.
Right.
But all that kind of organizational development happened after the Oklahoma City bombing.
Interesting. And you know, they use cadaver dogs as well to find. Is that also an application?
That
for
could be an
rat?
application. We're doing the live things currently. But yeah, you could do that.
Incredible. And the technology that's there, I mean, I was watching when the rat was outfitted, there's a camera on the rat.
Yeah.
And what else is in that device that's on its back?
There's a camera and then a Wi-Fi transmission. This will change over time, and then I think it also has Bluetooth, and then there's a microprocessor with a machine learning capacity. So basically, the reason you want that is, let's say you can have a machine learning, like have it pause the YouTube video, right? So if you have a machine learning algorithm monitoring the video feed, you don't need to connect it to a computer to process that at all. And you don't need to connect to the outside world. So you can like extract all that data from within the unit itself.
So you don't need to be connected to the Wi-Fi or anything of that sort?
Correct. Which you really need, because a lot of machine learning applications require cloud computing or something like that, that we take for granted every time we're like, I'm going to use a GPS. But that's actually a very like power and computationally intensive thing that we're just doing because we're used to it. But like in places like Cambodia where you don't have
that connectivity and
yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
Wow, fascinating. And what other applications do you see in the future for
there's a broader world of like interspecies communication that I'm exploring. Like I'm working with horses a little bit. Yeah, because it's fast. There's this whole creepy realm of advertising and like gathering data on people, right? So just with your phone being in your pocket, you can determine if you're carrying luggage or not, if you're riding a bicycle or if you're on the bus. And then there's a lot of like, it's a gray market industry of third-party advertisers can tell if you're limping, if you know how old you are, what your posture is like. So if you kind of remove it from that like weird advertising privacy invasion realm, there's a lot you can do. And yeah, like the rats are smart, and this is a vast platform for interspecies communication if we're able to like connect their senses under that idea I mentioned earlier.
Is there a breed of rat that's better than another rat? I mean, you use the pouch. You were talking about the pouch rats earlier.
Oh yeah. So the giant African pouch rats are used. They live for about 7 years. They can be trained in 6 to 9 months, and they're very friendly, very smart, and very tough. And they can live well in tropical environments. Yeah, so that's why that species is used.
So from an economic standpoint, is a rat more cost efficient than a dog, let's say, or?
Yeah, in terms of training, yeah, because When a dog is trained, it's connected to its handler, and like if that person retires, the dog
So
can't
you
do
don't,
anymore.
a rat will work with
The
anybody.
rats don't have that codependency. No, they're
Interesting.
Like, yeah, they work for
Wow.
anyone.
Wow, that's great.
So you could have 20 rats and 5 handlers, and they're all interchangeable. That being said, there's certain situations where the rats need to be used or advantageous, but they're not like, you can't just like send the rat out and like, all right, go get me a pizza, right? Like,
Right.
It is a confined and situationally predicated
Great.
action environment. Yeah.
So shall we take some questions from?
Whatever you'd like, dear sir.
Yeah.
Coming with the microphone. You can shout it out for now, but we want the internet to hear the questions. Visitors first.
Andrew, I have a German Shepherd, and as I
Up to the mic so the internet can hear you.
Andrew, I have a German Shepherd, and as we walk her in the various parks and mountains and whatnot, we have come across people with shepherds or other dogs that are search and rescue, and it's often, obvious that the dog is unique that we're meeting. And then people tell us, well, yeah, we got to bring them out because this is part of the stress reduction. They've been working for the last week or whatnot, or they've been on assignment with some of these organizations you're talking about. So there's a burnout, I think, on the dogs. They can handle so much of that stress, and then they got to be treated like they got to play. Like, does that happen with the rats at all? Do they have a burnout cycle?
They don't they work for like 20 minutes to an hour. I don't know of like an emotional burnout thing. The rats in Tanzania, yeah, they have like a good pension system for them. They all get names, and then when their efficacy declines, there's this little rat resort. So like they'll die of old age, which is unique for the rat world, right? But yeah, in terms of like them playing, needing to play and be social, I think they do that anyway, but there's not this like intense human dog thing like, oh, my dog hurts, my heart hurts, I need to let him play. The rats are kind of okay to just frolic with each other and call it a day.
Are you confident you understand them enough to conclude this?
That they're not stressed? I guess we could always ask them, right? Like, Artie, are you stressed?
What's the source of the funding for these programs with the rats?
Mostly the U.S. State Department funds APOPO, and then some private donors, and then some UK funding as well. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit.
A little bit off the subject, but in the Catholic religion, there are 3 main shrines in which the Virgin Mary has supposedly appeared at Guadalupe, Fatima, and Lourdes, and the latest one is in Kibeho in Rwanda. Have you heard about that?
The shrine in Rwanda?
Yeah, the Kibeho, where they say there's a woman there, a nun there, who has actually talked with the Virgin Mary.
I did not talk to the woman who talked to the Virgin Mary.
Okay.
But
Okay.
that sounds like quite the experience.
Andrew, thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh, thanks.
In fact, I'll watch it again. Question that I have, I notice there's a continuity of communication, whether it's you with a camera and a pen or a rat with a camera on it. What's your personal philosophy and how you'd like to use communication in the future?
Use communication to do what?
Well, that's the question.
Yeah, I think the realm of interspecies communication is fascinating. The ability to so there's a few kind of like broad assumptions and debates, right? Like most people would object to like beating the shit out of your dog, but we'll eat a chicken sandwich in this country, right? So there is like a kind of implicit hierarchy. My take is that animals have sentience. I don't know if you want to call it consciousness, if that gets out, but like most creatures have sentience, and it's possible to connect those sentiences through the ways the animals naturally perceive the world and communicate, right? So like the rats can say like, hey man, I found a landmine, give me a banana, right? By just scratching over the landmine and saying, give me a banana. And that's like a legitimate form of communication. I don't know if you want to call it a language or the grammar of rat to human communications, but yeah, you could do other things. And I think it's just a fascinating realm, and I'm Yeah, excited to move in. Now that we have the, like I made this, this is an open source project, so you can like download one of the rat packs and build your own. And I'm working with a collaborator up north to get it to work on small dogs. And then, yeah, you could train your dog to like sit in front of the door when it wants to go for a walk rather than barking or something, right? And then, all right, so my dog's sitting there and now I'm gonna take it for a walk, or the dog started to scratch its paw 3 times, so then, you know, that tells Alexa to put on a Alanis Morissette song, like whatever. So yeah, the animals, through this kind of way of thinking, animals can manipulate their environment, particularly like an Internet of Things environment. And then also you're able to know what's going on with another creature. Like you can track your dog's day, like did it go murder 8 squirrels and bury them in the middle of the yard, and you didn't know it was murdering 8 squirrels, and then you scratch it more at night, and then the previously mentioned anxiety gets released and the dog no longer does that, right? So there's all these opportunities for deeper and unprecedented understanding of other kinds of life through this way of thinking. And the tech is now like accessible, right? Like bats are, you know, use echolocation. You can get like a cheap echolocation sensor and then kind of imagine what it is like to be a bat and like make a little robot that does something similar. So yeah, I think it's tech-mediated interspecies communication is something I think about a lot and want to explore more. So, yeah.
Great. Any other
I've got a question going back to you in Africa and some of that halfway dark stuff. I've always been fascinated by what happens when an army of young men goes to a new place and you now have drunken, horny 19-year-olds with guns and a comparatively large amount of money, what it does to the local economy. Do you see where I'm going with this? You were with a UN troop, large force. UN's been criticized by sending people to countries that end up bringing cholera with them and VD. And again, 19-year-olds want to date whoever is available. And in the black market, that gets very... do you see a question in there? I hope.
Yeah, you're conflating a few scandals. Like the cholera thing was in Haiti. That's a different UN operation. I guess to answer your question, I would go back to the Belgian colonization of Congo, because I'm familiar with that policy. The Belgians would send single men, and with like no other resources. And then, you know, it's malarial. So you have single men getting malaria who are homesick, and yeah, like that's that like Heart of Darkness stuff that went on was kind of structurally embedded with the Belgian colonization policy. There's prostitution and sexual assault with all men with guns.
Did you see in the UN group you were embedded with, did you see negative as well as positive impact, I guess is what I'm questioning.
It was negative in that like they left me out to die. There was that was a frowny face. But in terms of the sexual assault, that was all Congolese militias. I heard of no UN. There was some report.
No, I'm asserting it's a universal phenomenon that anywhere armies go, bad things happen.
No, there was some scandal around that, around Manuk, but it wasn't. It was nothing compared to like the rape of the Congolese militias were conducting.
To their own Congolese people.
I don't know if you want to blame a people. That's just what was going on.
So there's a book that I've gotten, and this is a fellow I think that had come, or maybe was a member of the club, Jean-Pierre Hallet. Did you ever know him?
No, I didn't.
He wrote 2 books. One's called Congo Kitabu, and he also he lived with the Pygmies for a long time. He had a store down in Santa Monica selling artifacts from these different tribes to send back to them. A really wonderful guy. And so fascinating. He was with the Belgian government at the time, and he just fell in love with the populace, and it's just a great read. Alan, did you ever hear of him?
I haven't, but I'd like to read that book. Thank you for...
Jean-Pierre Hallet.
Jean-Pierre Hallet.
Yeah.
Merci. Any other questions? Well, thank you for a very fascinating presentation.
Thank you for the moderation.
Let's hope that rats can help solve more problems in the world.
Right?
That'd be great.
Thank you. Thank you very much.